All right, thanks a lot, Donna. My name is Ivan Kaisan. I'm from Honolulu, Hawaii. Welcome to the Braver Angels Film Club. Joining me today are fellow film club leaders Donna Murphy, Molly Zeff, and Stephanie Zamora. Now, for those of you who are here for the first time, which I counted on the registration are a majority of you, the way this film club works is that we moderators ask all of you participants various questions to explore different aspects about the film we just saw. Now, if you'd like to speak, raise your electronic hand at the bottom, and we will call on you one by one. And for now, though, please mute your microphone, and unmute when you're called. We will be following the Braver Angels ground rules for discussion. We do want to give a chance for everyone to speak, especially those who haven't spoken before. We ask you to keep your remarks brief, preferably about 2 minutes at the most. And finally, we may not get to everybody to speak on a question because of time limitations. Now, as Donna said, we're here to discuss the coddling of the American mind. And we have a special treat, as we announced in our email. We have producer Courtney Moorhead Balaker and the director Ted Balaker here today, which we'll be discussing the film with. Courtney wrote, directed, and produced Little Pink House. That's a award-winning film about Suzette Kilo's historic fight to save her neighborhood home. And those of you who are like me, familiar with land use law, remember the Supreme Court case Kelo versus the City of New London. It's all about the use of eminent domain for private parties. Ted directed and produced the award-winning documentary, Can We Take a Joke?, which examined the clash between comedy and outrage culture. And if you're a longtime film club member, you will know that we did see and discuss this film a while back. Now we're ready to start the discussion with Molly. Is Molly still here?
Yeah, she's here. I was having a little trouble. I had to switch to my phone and I was having a little trouble with the mute issue.
Okay.
So I will be facilitating questions for the director and producer. And then Stephanie will take questions from the audience. We're aiming to go for about 10 minutes now. Usually it's about 8:15, but we'll do about 10 total if we can do that. And try to keep your answers to a minute or two. No big pressure, but I want to go to the first one, which is just very simple. Why did you decide to make the movie?
Various reasons. In the first place, Courtney and I have been friends with Greg Lukianoff for a lot of years, probably about 10 or 15. And when the book came out, we didn't realize that there was this chapter. We then realized that there was this chapter to his life that we didn't know about, his brush with suicide. And so at the personal level, that was one reason. Another reason which is also deeply personal, is that we have a 9-year-old son who's going to be a teenager in about half an hour. And we wanted to make sure that we understood the issues and kind of set him up for a better future than what's happened with so many Gen Zers. And then the third issue is just that it's literally one of the most important issues of our time. As John and Greg mentioned in the book over and over, this is a whole generation that's at stake. And so there were lots of reasons for us to be very interested in pursuing this project.
Great. And I just want to get a little background on that. And then in terms of the people you interviewed, so the students in the film, how did you find and choose the students? And were there specific students or students of a certain background, like identity-wise, you wish you could have included but couldn't?
Well, yeah, students that we interviewed were not profiled in the book. That's really more Ted's background as a journalist and identifying people and stories that could help bring a very intellectual concept to life. Human stories tend to resonate with people more than ideas. And if you can find people who can explain their life experience or what they've come up against, and the idea is baked into that, that's usually the best interview subject in a film or a television show. So Ted found all of them, really. And we were looking for young people who were either in college at the time or had just graduated, who could talk about that culture and that environment that the book focuses on. That was really important to us because that's the demographic, that's the generation that is having a hard time, Gen Z. While we were making it, it was pretty fascinating to us how many headlines came out about the mental health crisis among that generation. And it just propelled us more to get this out there and get it made, because we were seeing some really serious problems and patterns that were happening that you saw detailed in the film. But I'll hand it off to you in terms of how you found our Saeed and Ariane and Anna.
For the most part, it was either luck or hard work or some combination of the two. There's not like just a path that you can go on and find good interview subjects. So in one case, it was easy because Lucy, for instance, the Stanford student who just graduated, what was it, last month? So she's now a newly minted psychology degree holder from Stanford. She wrote an article for Quillette that Greg happened to see, and he forwarded that to me, and then I followed up with her. In other cases, like with Saeed, for instance, it was just talking with a bunch of different people. Oh, you should talk to this person, you should talk to that person. And so it wasn't a whole lot of rhyme or reason to it. But when we found people like Saeed or like Kimmy or Ariane and all the rest, Courtney and I just kind of knew. I mean, I hope you had that experience with all of them on the screen. We've had lots and lots of screenings so far, and people, I'm very happy to say, really connect with our interview subjects. And I think, really grow fond of them. And we've had a lot of them on Q&As a lot. I think Saeed is the record holder right now for most Q&As attended with us. We were on the East Coast in April, and he was at least 2 or 3. So yeah, it was a long journey finding them, but it was just such an exhilarating experience getting to meet them, because it's such a dark topic in so many ways. And when you meet people, young people like this, it does, not to sound cheesy, but it does give you a little bit of hope for the future.
Thank you so much. And I'm seeing questions in the chat. I just want people to know we'll get to those after the section where we ask questions. So we were wondering on our team, have you screened the movie with a conservative or rural audience? And if so, what was the response?
Conservative or rural? Let's see, where have we been that would count as rural? Colorado? Boulder's not rural, right?
No, that's a pretty liberal campus. Yeah, a lot of our screenings have been on college campuses, which is intentional. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because the film, it didn't play in film festivals on purpose. We have been doing strategic screenings in college campuses is where we want to be seen. So Pepperdine, I guess, is considered a conservative campus.
Yeah, but although that screening was for the faculty who, oftentimes aren't really conservative. I mean, we know that a lot of conservatives have watched it now, just from it being on streaming at Substack. And I can say that fairly soon we'll be, I'm happy to say, streaming on a bunch of other very popular platforms. So stay tuned for that. And then we'll get lots more of every kind of demographic. And I should say, you know, we've been on so many college campuses. It's over 50 at this point. And so, of course, college campuses tend to be quite left leaning. But oftentimes we will have, I'm thinking of like Wake Forest, for instance, in North Carolina. That was co-hosted by the College Democrats and Young Americans for Freedom. So, for instance, in that one screening, you would have people from, you know, different ends of the political spectrum. And that was just a, you know, that was a lovely screening as well. We had, I think it was very braver angels, if I could say that. I think people who came at it from different points of view still got a lot out of it, and we had a very lively discussion afterwards. So I guess, you know, I don't know, does Winston-Salem count as rural? I don't know.
A small town, small city, I should say, not
Yeah.
really a town.
Yeah.
And last one from us for now. Lucy, the young woman with autism, switched to this focus on kindness versus worrying about identity politics or whatnot. And we're wondering, do you believe others should make this shift as well?
Yeah, I
From
think
whatever,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think shifting away, you know, we think the world of Lucy, and she had that anchor in her early life, and that's frankly we have a small sample size, but that's a little bit of a pattern that we see, that when these young people are kind of rudderless for a while, a lot of times they can harken back to something that they had early in life, and remember that. That's with Kimmy as well, and her Christian faith. She could kind of reach back for that anchor. You know, she may have lost it for a while, but she was able to find it. So I think, you know, kindness is definitely a much preferable alternative to basing your worldview around, you know, immutable characteristics. I don't think that's going to get us anywhere except misery for the most part.
all right. Well, I'm gonna flag a couple of questions in the chat, and then actually I want people to go ahead and raise their hands. I'll go, we're gonna switch to Stephanie for running this part. So Stephanie, there are 3 questions in the chat if you want to start with those, and then we can do hand raising as soon as we get through those. Does that sound good?
Okay, so so the question from Jody Fisher, should we start with that? Is that what you're talking about, Molly? So that's
Yep,
what I
go
see.
for it.
Okay, yeah, okay. So obviously not all of Gen Z goes to college. Did you try to find young people who are not in college to get that perspective on their generation's experience?
Short answer is no, because we had to, you know, but I could say if we had found someone who just didn't go to college, we definitely wouldn't have excluded them had they, you know, seemed like a good interview subject. We knew that college was going to play a big role, but yeah, we would both been very happy to include somebody who didn't attend college. It just so happened that those who we spoke with did, and as you all probably know, the problems are often most acute at colleges, and especially, you know, specific kinds of colleges. And so that was another reason to go in that direction.
Yeah, and kind of, so then did you also go to non-elite college campuses or community colleges?
Yeah, we talked to people from, so the 20-somethings that you see on the screen, there were a lot of others that we spoke with in one way or another besides them. And we spoke with students from, yeah, all types of different backgrounds. And like I said earlier, it was really a matter of once you kind of know it when you see it, when you meet someone like Kimmy or Saeed or Lucy, you know that they're going to be, that they have great stories to tell and that they're going to connect with people. I should also say we wanted people, I mean, in a lot of ways, this was one of the biggest filters. If those of you have read the book, the coddling, know that it's a great book and it's packed with all kinds of wisdom and studies and examples, but there's a lot to it. And we only have 90 minutes or so to tell the story. And on top of that, we can't just like throw statistics at people. We have to introduce characters, do character development, have plot, dramatic tension, all the elements of storytelling. So we had to really focus, and Courtney and I decided to focus on the 3 great untruths. So we were very keen to find young people who could illuminate the 3 great untruths through their personal stories. So every one of our 20-somethings can speak directly to at least one of the 3 great untruths. And so there were some people who had great stories to tell, but we were kind of scratching our heads going, well, it doesn't really connect with one of the 3 great untruths. So unfortunately, it's not going to be a fit. So definitely those.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to know what the definition of elite college is, because, for instance, Kimi Katiti, I wouldn't consider that an elite college. It was an art school in Los Angeles. So most of our interview subjects weren't, I mean, we didn't interview people from Harvard so I don't know what that means, but I wouldn't consider most of our
well, Stanford, of course.
Stanford, well, yeah, Lucy, but I mean, most of them, I wouldn't say they went to elite colleges. They went to small.
Lafayette is very well regarded. Yeah,
I think it was a mix, really. But it's a really good question. But yeah, as Ted said, I think that it was more about focusing on students who could tell their story as related to the ideas.
Yeah, and I would say Providence College. Sorry, Anna, probably wouldn't be considered.
Yeah. Okay, I have one more in the chat, and then Luke, I'm going to go to you, and Phil, then you, and then I'm going to come back to the chat and try to get this in order. So, but this is a good question. This is maybe based not only on your experience with the film, but also with all the film screenings you've done. Is the general consensus from students who viewed the film that colleges and universities are really making them more fragile?
I think so. Now it is, somewhat of a self-selected audience who comes to watch our movie on campuses. So I'm not going to, try to fool myself that it's just a random sample. But we do have, we've been to so many campuses now, and I can tell you the audiences are diverse in just about every way. People talk about diversity these days, and they respond more or less the same way. We've done a lot of Q&As, and we kind of know what questions are coming for in a lot of cases, and what comments are coming, and so that shows a certain continuity. And we've even had, for instance, we've had anonymous questionnaires. So we've asked students to fill out anonymous questionnaires, and they're very illuminating. And we ask them, tell us what you don't like too, and that part's hard, but that was before it was a final cut, so we could still make changes. At this point, I don't want to hear anything bad. I just want to hear good things. But I'm joking. But in those questionnaires, they kind of clustered around certain ideas too, like stimulating. That was stimulating, hopeful. Those were some of the phrases that we heard a lot. That I'm stronger than I've been told. I'm not going to give my kids social media. Just this idea that they're not weaklings, that they can do more than the adults in their lives have told them or suggested that they can do.
Cool. Okay, Luke, let's go ahead and hear your question.
Thanks for featuring this film, and thanks a lot for Ted and Courtney for you being here to share your perspective. My question for you too is, when I watched the film, I kind of got the sense that it wasn't capturing the other side. Like it seems very anti-woke, anti-DEI. So I'm kind of wondering, do you see anything positive about DEI? Do you ever talk to people who say, you know, I actually went to a DEI program and it really helped me be more sensitive and aware? That's my question. Thank you.
I don't hear a lot of that, no. I'm sure there's some people out there. We have a good friend of ours, Kareth Foster, who we sometimes call a DEI dissident. She does diversity training, but in a much different way, in a kind of a common humanity way. And those of you who saw Can We Take a Joke will have seen Kareth Foster too, because she was featured in that. So you know, again, I go back to the 90 minutes. You have 90 minutes to tell people a very complicated story. And I would have loved to include, you know, DEI practitioners, for instance, but 90%, I would say more than that, of our audience kind of knows at least the broad strokes of that. The coddling is a very different,
That's important.
it's a very different story, and it's a very subtle story. It's not something we always, you talk about like elevator pitches and movies and stuff. It's a very hard thing to pitch in an elevator. And so you need to be able to tell people to really lay out the story. And frankly, that's how a lot of documentary, that's how a lot of movies are. We didn't try to tell every single point of every single, it just would have been a mess of a movie if we tried to do it that way. This is Lucy's story. This is Kimmy's story. This is Saeed's story. We were bursting at the seams with the characters we had. Had we added anything more, it would have diluted the quality of all of it, I think, and I fear. That's why we thought we have to focus. We have to focus on what we think is most important. Initially, we wanted this to be a 3-part series, in which case, like that would have been great. We would have loved to dig deeper into that.
Yeah, and I think just to tag on to that, there are cultural assumptions, right? As Ted just said, people know what DEI is, they understand what woke is for a variety of reasons. So when you're making a film that assumes people kind of know the baseline of the culture or the idea, and you're either going beyond it or you're opposing it or you're challenging it, you usually do that in a feature length as opposed to an episodic where you have more time to unpack different points of view. But it wasn't omitted on purpose. It was sort of based on a cultural assumption that on the modern day college campus, this is the standard. This is what happens in the administration. This is what students are exposed to. That's an assumption. Now, not all college campuses operate that way. Greg Lukianoff, obviously, his career has mainly been protecting administrator, professor, and students' rights on college campuses, free speech. So he's coming from a point of view of there are certain assumptions we can make about what's happening and about what students are being exposed to. Let's examine that.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, Philip, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, as you probably well know, Jonathan Haidt has written many papers on social media and the phones and how they've disrupted the lives of young people. So my question is that when you're talking to these students, were they able to grasp how the social media and their behavior on the phones were contributing to their problems? And the second half of that, I don't know if you had a chance to talk to any of the universities or schools where they were. The question is, do the professors and so forth, do they have an understanding of what they need to do so that people can't just express their truth and then find out that they're devastated by 2,500 emails from hateful people.
It's a great question. Two anecdotes from Duke University where we screened. One is that after the screening during the Q&A, Ted asked how many of the students got phones and at what age. And we were shocked, and we're talking like 20 somethings, and we were shocked that some didn't get phones until they were 13 or 14. We were absolutely shocked by that. If you that long, I was actually pleased by it. So into the second half of that, the professor who organized the Duke screening and hosted it, as we were walking to the parking lot, and this was really heartbreaking to me, he said, basically seniors here at Duke, they're scrubbing their social media because they're afraid that someone's going to dig something up and it will prevent them from getting a job. And that really broke my heart, because that's like erasing a part of your history. We all make mistakes. We all do stupid things, especially when we're really young. And they're freaked out because they know that they could lose an opportunity, or they could get fired, or they could be canceled because of something they said 8 years ago. And that's very real. So I do think that the phones and the social media has a huge impact on all of us, but especially that generation. And those are my 2 cents about that question.
And specifically to your question, yes, I think the young people know, even survey data on this show that they know that it makes them miserable. And John Haidt goes into it quite a bit in his most recent book. And certainly the professors know too.
Just a quick comment on that. Maybe what they have to do is limit the space that comments go out into the world. So in other words, if I have a class on history or whatever it is, that I create the network of people that we know, so you can comment there, as opposed to it going out to the whole campus and the whole world. Maybe I don't know if that's a limitation on free speech, but it's a way of protecting people from the randomness of hatred. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because these days, if you make a mistake or say something stupid or without really thinking, it often doesn't stay in that spot. It can be, the juicier it is, the further it travels.
Okay, so Donna, Molly, Ivan, do we want to take, I know Margot's had her hand up for a long time to ask a question. I know that we're kind of at time. Do you want to just take one more for the director and producer?
Yeah.
Yeah, how about one more?
Okay, Margot, go ahead. I know you've been waiting there a long time.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for coming. And I'm also Gen Z, and I really related to a lot that was presented in the movie. But one of the things that I was thinking when it comes to mental health is I experienced a diagnosis of overdiagnosis. I was diagnosed with something that I didn't actually have. And I know several people who either have gone through a similar experience or seem to be self-diagnosing with things that they don't actually have, because it's become so normalized now. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on how that dynamic could also be playing into the increased rates of anxiety and depression that we might be seeing. Yeah, sorry if that.
No, that's a fantastic question, Margot, and thank you for your kind words. I'll just bring up a really quick anecdote to that. So we have a 9-year-old son, as we mentioned, and when we were traveling on the East Coast for 3 weeks, he watched a lot of TV in hotel rooms. And we don't watch a lot of TV.
We took him with us.
Yeah, we took him with us. Yeah, we didn't just send him out there alone. He was in there, and we were watching these ads because we're streaming people. We cut the cord, and we're very particular about what he watches, and, you know, because we want it to be appropriate. And I was really fascinated by, I think it was Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, and they would have what's called an interstitial. It's like a little short film in between two cartoons. And it was about kids having anxiety. And they were singing songs about having anxiety and about how they just experience it. And we're talking about like little kids. And then there's a movie called Inside Out 2 that just came out in theaters. And their new main character is anxiety. It's a great trailer. It's a creature who shows up with tons of baggage. And I was thinking, I don't remember being 10 years old and thinking about anxiety. And I was almost concerned that cartoons and children's movies, that's one thing if you want to let kids know that it's normal to feel anxious, but are we also teaching people to feel anxious? And when you were talking about the diagnoses, Margot, I thought that is what made me think. It's like, are we teaching people to, or kids, young people, to have stuff that they don't necessarily have, but we assume they have? I think that could be dangerous. It's one thing to say, hey, relate to this. You're not unusual if you are experiencing these things. But it's another thing to say, you're experiencing these things, whether you like it or not. And that's how I felt a lot about what I was seeing on network television, the interstitials. And again, it's a tricky thing because obviously parents are dealing with kids with anxiety. The pandemic was really weird. It was super weird for young kids when they were doing distant learning. They didn't get to see their friends. It didn't impact, our kid was 5, it didn't impact him as much, but it did impact teenagers a lot. Because where did they go? They went to social media because they couldn't go to the mall, they couldn't drive, they didn't hang out with their friends. And you're Gen Z, so you're kind of, Margot, I think in that window, and you know better than I do, but I know that the shutdowns were really hard on tweens, teenagers, and people in their young 20s, because it was just weird. People didn't go to their high school graduations. They didn't go to their college graduations during that 2 to 3 year window. And so I do think there's a strange thing going on. It's like there's therapy, and then there's broadcasting psychological problems that maybe people don't necessarily have until they know they exist.
But it's also the young people themselves wanting to have it because it's now social currency. And I would recommend, we have our official website, thecoddlingmovie.com. We had a recent contribution by a woman who's been a high school teacher for, I think, 25 years. And she talks about, Margo, what you mentioned, the self-diagnosis. And she talks about her students and, frankly, the social currency involved in having, a certain disability or a certain condition. People treat you differently. And that's appealing to a lot of young people. And so, yeah, I would recommend that article. It was one of our most popular.
You should actually read that one. I've been following most of the posts for a while. Thank
excellent.
you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I think we have to move on to the next part of our program tonight, which is questions for the audience. Ivan, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, just a little shift on gears and put the focus back on all of you participants. And we'll start off easy. What did you think of the movie and what were your takeaways? Holly, thanks for starting us off.
Sure, I'll go. So I was grateful, and I think the term that was used, that this brought life to the intellectual concepts. I had skimmed the book a number of years ago and have been looking for a way to build a diversity of thought curriculum within my small company. And so I think takeaways were the 3 what were they called? The 3 bad ideas, I think is what it was called in the book, and having those highlighted so well, particularly that humans are meant to be anti-fragile. You know, we build muscles by tension and stress, that the butterfly comes out of the womb. And in my field of philanthropy, there's a lot of talk around ACEs with kids, and the one adult mentor that can help someone through ACEs. And then the question has come up, can't we just get rid of the ACEs, right? And so that was a really interesting thing to think about, that it's not always the traumas and the trouble in our life, but it's having the right supports to get through them. And that actually makes us stronger than if we never have the trouble. So I super appreciated those being highlighted so well. I will say my other takeaway, and then I'll stop, was I do wish I had more money to give you guys to have another story on that same point of all the students of color being international, because I think if I want to use this to show my mom, who leans pretty far right, she's going to go, yep, told you it's a mess. If I'm going to use it to show people who are more left, in my opinion, I think they're going to dismiss a little, because they're going to say there's not a multi-generational African-American experience where certain triggers are handed down. It is, you know, my church is incredibly multi-diverse, and we have these conversations all the time between African immigrants to the United States and African Americans who grew up for generations, and the similarities and differences they experience. So I'm not trying to be negative, but I do wish I could give you more money to make that happen, because I think it's a huge piece in being able to show it to both audiences and kind of get the effect of pulling us back to what's reasonable and common sense. So thank you for your hard work. My brother's a filmmaker. I know this isn't easy.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot, Holly. Emily.
Yeah, I just really appreciate that you guys made the film. It kind of explained, I'm Gen Z, and it kind of gave more context to, like almost all of my friends have talked about having depression, and it kind of like gave more context to like the experience of like the kids I grew up with. I'm a little bit, I don't know, I have older parents and so was raised by an older generation than most of my friends. So I'm kind of in this weird in-between thing, but yeah, helped me like understand my own generation a little bit more. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Emily. Sue.
Hi. Yeah, I'm enjoying the movie. We've got about half an hour left because we had a glitch in the download because we live very rural. But I thought it's doing a really good job of illustrating the concepts in the book with some really good stories. So I appreciate it from that point of view. And I put a note to this effect in the chat, which is I encouraged my husband to watch with me because he's not terribly involved in politics. He's very involved in his professional life and his work in soils and agricultural health and all that sort of stuff. Doesn't pay attention to this. I spent 4 years as an adjunct on a college campus more recently, and I said, you need to listen to this so that you can understand the context our grandkids are living in. And he kept saying, wow, I can't believe they're really teaching this stuff. What is that stuff? What is the microaggression? All this is all completely new. So what I'm wondering is how well the movie connects with people who don't have that baseline, who are seriously not in that cultural loop, and this is all a totally foreign language. And so that's my only comment. I brought some background to it. I read the book, listened to the book on Audible while commuting 80 miles each way to the college campus. So I had that baseline, he did not. And it was just interesting that our reactions are very different.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, it's certainly, I think most people who've seen it have some sort of baseline because that's why they're interested in seeing it in the first place. But yeah, it's a very interesting question.
And one thing I'll say too to that is one of the three great untruths that I think is kind of universal, especially right now, is this concept of tribalism, us versus them. Right? And we're all feeling that a lot right now. And you don't have to be in Gen Z, and you don't have to be a college student, and you don't have to be a teacher, but we know what tribalism is. And we see what that does. And that's what I think Braver Angels is really focused on, is this concept of, yeah, that doesn't usually work. Let's talk. So that baseline of tribalism, I think, does, and I hope when we get to a broader audience, which Ted mentioned, we're going to go to the streamers pretty soon here. I'm hopeful, and we're going into a really weird election year time. So we're in it, sorry, election cycle. And tribalism is universal. It's not generational.
All right, thanks a lot. Let's just do one more and then we'll have to move on to the next question. Bill, I know you've had your hand up for a while. Close us out on this one.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, I thought it was a great movie. Number one is I like the word coddling in the title because I think it really hit the nail on the head about what this was all about. Number two is I like the fact that you broke it out into 3 lessons learned. You are fragile, always trust your feelings, and us versus them, because I'm very analytical and I like to have bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3, so I know what to remember. I also like the fact that you focused on stories because, you know, people really glom onto stories and remember the stories. Number 4 is, as a braver angels who believes in listening to both sides, I was mortified, absolutely mortified by some of the scenes that took place at the colleges where people like Ben Shapiro were shouted down and were not allowed to speak. Even though I don't either agree or like Ben Shapiro, I thought it was mortifying, if I have to say that again, that he was shouted down. Braver angels don't believe that way, and we don't do that way. We don't act that way. The last thing I will say is I thought it was a little bit slanted. We've talked about this already, so I don't want to beat up on it too much. I felt a lot of it was, you know, the left is woke, the left coddles their kids, the left is a bunch of snowflakes, and it didn't say enough about the right, which, you know, if you don't go to college and you gravitate toward the right and you become one of the Proud Boys so that you can belong to a tribe. I mean, the movie left that out, but we've already talked about why you left that out. But all in all, I thought it was well worth watching.
Well, thank you very much. And I would say, you know, if you want to make a Proud Boy documentary, that's great. Wokeness, you know, and kind of what would you call it? Left-wing fundamentalism. That's something that is shared by roughly 8% of the American public. So most people who are on the left are not woke. It's a subset within that. But, you know, that's just kind of the lay of the land. The people who are most at risk for anxiety, depression are on the left these days. So I think if we just had it 50% on, you know, crazy right-wingers, 50% crazy left-wingers, we would have actually been doing a disservice to what's going on right now. Because look, the right has its own problems, and I'm all for making documentaries about that. This one is primarily on the left. Now, it's not just people on the left, but you know, John Haidt has done a lot of research onto who's most prone to being depressed these days. It's a young female progressive. That those are the people who are most likely to be depressed these days, and so that's why we focused on that.
Do I have permission to make one final comment or observation?
Sure. Quick question, quick statement.
You know, you showed sort of a trend line about the curve was very, very flat up until, what was it, 2012, and then all of a sudden it took off. And now we're going to focus on these 5 kids that came through the pipeline in 2012. And then the story took place, and then the kids went away. The question on my mind is, okay, that's fine, but what happened after that? What's the world like in 2024? The movie never talks about that.
You have to help us make the sequel.
Yes,
Yeah, well,
help us find out.
well, you know,
we'd love to do a follow-up.
Well, and there are things behind the scenes now where we're trying. I'm so happy you brought that up, because we agree with you, and we would love to continue the story, and we're trying. Hopefully we'll be able to announce something in the not too distant future.
You can do it.
All right. Let's go to the next question, which is about all of you who are or will be parents. Did the film challenge your idea about how to raise a child? Did it touch on the the axioms about preparing your child for the road or trying to get the road ready for your child? How did it affect your ideas about parenting? Or if it didn't affect it, I mean, we want to hear from the free range parents too. Bruce, did you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, I can talk to that. And as a center right person who's also a teacher, I've wrestled with a lot of these issues in my class. As a parent, I did not let my kid have a phone until he was 14. And I guess as a center right person, I had a lot of discussions with him, warning him about higher education and the liberal to left biases there. I guess, I mean, to the points that, these three great untruths, they certainly ring true to me. And I'm not sure if that's because I lean right, and they make a lot of sense to me, that we have become, a society that's too fragile and people trust their feelings too much. And, I think these are things I tried to talk to my son about, but I would say that we still need to do a lot of work in reading The Anxious Generation, which was, sort of, I feel like these books are linked, right? Haidt mentions that the example parents have used in the past, the metaphor he uses is that they have seen themselves as carpenters who look at the wood and look at what they got and they try to make the best product out of their kids. That's a metaphor he uses to describe parenting today. And he makes the point we need to be more like gardeners. And but gardeners let things grow and they watch what's going on. They do some weeding, but even gardening is probably the approach I took to parenting, and I didn't do a good enough job. That really rung true to me today as I was watching the film again and reading The Anxious Generation, that I could have been, I now that my son's 21, he has a cell phone addiction, even though he didn't get the phone until he's 14. And we work on that a lot, but it's a challenge.
Oh,
Wow.
Thanks a lot. Cynthia, how about you?
Well, actually, I used to, until I retired very recently, I worked for a government agency where I was never permitted, if I was at a party and someone says, "Oh, can I have your phone number?" I was never permitted to give my business card out to anybody unless it was business. So anyway, so this is my business card, which says Free Range Mother,
all right.
right next to Student of the World.
Well done. Yeah, Lenore is.
For a lot of the time, I was a single parent. Even when I wasn't a single parent, sometimes the other person was ill and needed a lot more rest than what would have been optimal for raising children. So I believe my children really benefited in some ways because I knew I didn't have time. If you work an 8-hour day and you drive an hour to work each way because that's the job you have, and you have an hour for lunch, that's 11 hours you're away. I knew my children had to have someone for them and to learn how to do stuff. I taught them how to use public transportation. A couple of times I went on business trips to New York City, brought my teenage sons with me, showed them how to read a subway map, and went to my business. I said, "I'll meet you at the hotel at 6." But on the other hand, because that wasn't like, I wasn't giving them chores to do and making, I think they benefited by feeling that they were needed. That's something I don't see in any of this, that my children knew they were needed. They weren't doing chores or learning this stuff because somebody wanted to. I couldn't take care of them unless they had responsibility themselves. And that's one thing I don't see here, is this idea of maybe some of this anxiety. But at the same time, having a mom who is always exhausted and overstressed also hurt my kids in some ways. So anyway, that's all.
It sounds like you did a fantastic job of either intentionally or just because of your circumstances, a sense of purpose and independence. I was a kid without a cell phone because they didn't exist. I had to read a map. I had to know how to get places without a GPS device that wired my brain in a certain way to understand how to read a map, how to understand the world in a way that it's really hard right now, I think, for young people because they have the luxury and it sounds like you did a tremendous job and you were, you know, pulling a lot of weight for not just your kids and that I think that is beautiful free range parenting. Children, when they have a purpose and something that they know they have to do, even if they don't want to do it all the time, that creates grit and wires their brain in a different way.
Though I appreciate the compliment, and yet some of my children still have an awful lot of anxiety
Really?
that I don't understand. It's like, you know, I know it's horrible to say, but my thought is like, you got a roof over your head, you got food, you know, what's the big, you know?
Yeah.
So I truly don't understand. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'll let somebody else talk.
Well, thanks for that, Cynthia. George, how about finishing up this question?
Okay. Well, I'm right now a grandfather kind of thing. I'm also a retired Scoutmaster. My wife and I raised 3 boys. As adults, they're all in their mid-30s now, so I give you an idea of kind of the generations. My grandkids are between 4 and 10 months. We learned in our 60s of things that our children did that we had no idea that they did. So, you know, the later in life you get these stories of incidents and things like with potato cannons shot into a neighbor's garage and stuff like that. But anyway, I was a Scoutmaster for 12 years and we've had quite a few kids go through the program. And I actually kind of tended to group parents into like 2 groups. There were the ones who were like a little bit more of, okay, well, you're in scouting, here, go ahead, do what you do kind of thing, and kind of a little more hands off. And then I had some kids who I called it, they were on the train. Their parents were driving the train. Their parents decided what merit badges they were going to do, what their ranks were going to be, etc. And kind of the kids were very comfortable on the ride. And I often wonder kind of, you know, some of them, how they're going to function as adults because they were never really steering themselves. And so at the moment with my grandkids, working very hard kind of for independence and trying new things and being very adventurous. And I have to be careful because, again, I have 3 sons. My daughter-in-law is less adventurous than, you know, my son. I said, I'm going to take them on the train. We're going to go into Boston. And he was like, okay. And then my daughter-in-law found out and I got in a lot of trouble. But, you know, for a little bit trying to get that idea of like, I guess it's important. And, you know, kind of one of the things, it's that issue of resilience that's brought out in coddling. You know, you need to be stressed to know you can figure it out for yourself. And so one thing I'm doing there right now is just looking at it from the standpoint of making sure that my grandkids, as much as I can, are kind of making their own decisions and deciding their own things and making mistakes and recovering from the mistake, I guess, is an important thing. And that's something I tried to do as a Scoutmaster as well. So I think that's something we need to keep in mind. And if life becomes too programmed, it's very easy to kind of just, well, I'm, you know, I have my seat on the bus and the bus is moving forward or the train is moving forward and I'll just go where it takes me. So I think that idea of kind of that more, you know, I appreciated the comment about the free range mom. I think that's important that we allow our children to kind of test their limits and work problems out themselves. Just today, I was babysitting two of my grandkids, and they started fighting, and were coming out to my wife and I to get us to resolve it. And we said, "You guys go over there and figure it out for yourself," and just stayed out of it. And they figured it out. But too often, we're ready to jump in and intervene.
George, is that your bird?
That's a bird. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Right.
The bird has to
I don't want to cut off. I don't want to cut off Martha. You've had your hand up. Maybe if you can make a quick comment or something.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll make it quick then. I reared my husband and I reared 4 children. The 2 boys became therapists. The 2 girls have other careers and they're all very independent. But I just think it's complicated. And I had a little trouble with the book, just the causal relationships, you know, I found a little bit simplistic. So I just don't think it's one thing. I don't think it's just social media or just, you know, social justice or just, I mean, there's a wide range of problems that come up and a lot of challenges for every generation. I mean, Socrates said that kids are, you know, out of control. So I just think I think it's complicated. So it's a lot of these things that you're mentioning, I think are really good comments. And I love the film gave me food for thought. And I love that. I'm really open-minded. So, but it's a lot of these things. I don't see that it's like one or two patterns.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's all we can do is have food for thought. Let's move on for the next question. And Donna.
Okay, we're going to give you all a chance to weigh in. So what did you think of the film's premise that rather than people being fragile, people are anti-fragile and they need stressors to grow strong? Richard Davis, you're up first.
Figure out how to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I really think that's a wonderful concept and runs so counter to so much of how we often coddle our children. So that struck me as a really good observation. One thing the film did, which I thought was really delightful, that I don't think has been raised in this conversation, and maybe it has, but I'm struggling with a barking dog, so I've not heard everything. And that is humor. The film, there were quite a few moments in the movie where I laughed out loud. And I thought that was really great because I think what's missing in our national conversation, and I must admit, I do come from, you know, many of my relatives are from England, is humor. I think we've grown so earnest and so determined to try and control our environment or think that things that we cause things that we don't cause. I think that if we were able to, I don't know, back off a little bit or at least see the humor in life a little bit more actively, that might just help. It might be something that we should include more in our national conversation.
Thank you, Richard. Then you really would like another film by the Gallagher's, Can We Take a Joke? I highly recommend that much to you. I did want to say before we get on too much further, I lived in Japan, and in Japan, children as young as 6 or 7 hold hands and ride the subway together without adults to go to school. So that's another way of looking at what kids can and can't do. Okay, yeah. Ruth Wunderlich, you're up. He's coming back to the screen and needs to unmute.
In another
week or two, I'm going to go back to school and I teach mathematics, high school mathematics. And as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, how can I incorporate this into my messaging with the kids? Because of course, I try to teach them problem solving and what to do when you get stuck. And of course, it's the same issue, right? You have to get, this is my way of teaching. Like I have to get stuck in front of them. I have to really do, so they see what I do, because they don't know what to do when they're and then they don't learn the problem solving. And as I'm watching this, I'm like, well, how can I kind of incorporate this as also not just a math thing, but a life skill? Because of course it is a life skill to know what to do and get through something that you didn't previously know how it was going to go. So thank you. And my brain is kind of trying to figure out how I'm going to change my messaging and open that up to be more of just than a math skill and a life skill that they should glom onto and understand.
Yeah, Ruth, that's great. And hats off to you for doing that. It reminds me of what George just talked about conflict resolution. I mean, our kid was born in Los Angeles, and then we came out here, and I just remember going to playgrounds, and he's 2 or 3 years old. And if he and another kid got into a fight, all the moms were like, we'll figure it out. We'll solve it. But let them, like George says, like they can do it. And if you're not the mom swooping in, you're the weirdo. It's like, wait, you're not conflict resolution. So absolutely, problem solving, watching adults have to fail, watching adults fail, watching adults solve problems. It's all part of it. So that's fantastic.
So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to a few people who haven't had a chance to speak yet. So Kim and Eric Anderson, you go ahead.
Thanks. This has been great. Thank you for the film, by the way. My first job out of undergrad was in TV, and your motion graphics were really great. I really appreciated the way you brought that story to life. It was just a lot of fun. For what could have been a really dry type of expository film. I was just thinking about the question, which was about Anti-Fragile, and I think like even like basic exercise science bears that out, right? Like if we don't exercise our bodies, entropy will destroy us. And the same holds true of our minds. And I think that that's really on display in the film, in the fact that like, or somebody else mentioned a butterfly, right? If we try to help the butterfly out of its chrysalis, it can't fly. So I thought the movie like showed that very well, and with a lot of empathy towards the people that are experiencing this. And I also appreciate that you drew a little bit of a distinction with the way that the boys and the girls kind of deal with the stressor of the phone, because we live in Brooklyn, and like one thing that I have noticed, I too grew up as a free range kid. Like I grew up in Northern California, and we would ride our bikes out to like who knows where, and like find a place that didn't have a terrifying barking Rottweiler out front and call dad and be like, hey dad, can you come pick us up? And it's fine. We lived. But I've noticed that particularly with the young ladies, they always have the phone in their hand, like always. Whenever there's their purse or whatever, and I could see that borne out in the depictions in the film a lot. Is that like, I don't know. It took a. I just really appreciate it, and I think that we do need those stressors to not be fragile. And sometimes we break, and sometimes we fall down, and then we heal. And I think that at the end, the sense of at least the hinting towards the possibility of healing is nice, right? Like I see the people being wounded and then healing. So that's how we get strong. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. I see you're Eric of Kim and Eric. Okay. And I'm going to go on to another person who hasn't spoken yet, Don.
Thanks, Donna. And yeah, I really enjoyed the book. The film as well. I haven't read the book yet. And a couple of things came to mind. Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements. One of them is don't take anything personally. And that's kind of like the idea of being anti-fragile. To me, that concept, don't take anything personally, is really an important point for all of us to remember. And I think that is a choice, to be fragile, anti-fragile, and I think that should be taught to our kids. I have an eight-year-old granddaughter who's half Chinese, although she looks completely Chinese. And there's been some discussion, especially with my wife, about some concern about the schools, the public school she goes to is completely white, and whether she might be experiencing some discrimination there. Although I haven't heard of anything overt, but whether she should go into a private school, but I would be opposed to that. I think that she is anti-fragile. She has a tough dad. Her dad can be tough on her at times, but boy, she's pretty resilient. And so I'm going to encourage her to stay where she is, and I'm sure she can build her resilience as she stays put. And she's a smart kid. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Don. This conversation is so rich and we could go on and on, but we do want to move on to another question. So I'm kicking it back over to Stephanie.
Yeah, so the film does talk about microaggression a lot, and I know that there's a lot of baby boomers on this call. There's a lot of Gen X's on this call. We didn't have any introduction to such a topic at that age, but what do you think is the difference between a microaggression and just simply interacting with and trying to understand someone who is different from you? Because that's what I really got from the film, is that how all of this is really keeping people from getting to know each other instead of protecting them from hurting each other's feelings. So I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on that. Bill, go ahead.
I think you're asking for the impossible. One man's meat is another man's poison. Somebody says something and somebody's going to take it as a microaggression. Somebody else is going to take it as a compliment. I mean, we heard one of the students in the movie yesterday say something like, I'm dizzy from trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong and what's left and what's right and what I should take this way and what I should take that way. So I think, I hate to be a defeatist, but it's tough to figure out what's a microaggression and what's just meant in good faith.
Yeah, Margot, I'd love to hear your perspective as a Gen Z.
Thank you. I did not go to college, but I had a high school that taught very similarly to the colleges described in the film. And I remember the microaggression training that we had made me so anxious that it was actually harder to interact with people who are different from me, because I would freeze up and be like, I'm going to say something wrong and the world's going to end. And then I would be getting on myself. Now I'm treating them differently, and that's bad. And so I appreciate, having that story told, but there's the question, what's the difference between a microaggression and just trying to understand each other and what to do about it? I moderate a community forum for a digital magazine, and I do a lot of moderating of online servers because I'm trying to build a creative art brand. And so I think about this a lot. How do I draw a difference between like a joke and a hostile comment? And what I see in a lot of other places is their policy is don't say any sexism, racism, blah, blah, blah. Or if you have a conservative space, it's like, don't say these things against, I don't know, the Christian faith or something. And I can respect that if that's the intention of the space, right? I'm a Christian myself, so there's some different boundaries at church. But if I'm making rules for a neutral space, I don't like those policies because they start to bias towards different things that make people uncomfortable the different way. And I would rather say, be respectful, and let's look at the behavior from how disrespectful it is. And then you don't get scenarios like someone saying, oh man, I hate people who play Fortnite. And that's completely fine. It's just a joke. But if someone says the same joke, but they say, I hate women, they get in a lot more trouble, but I don't think that's fair. Whereas if you were ranking on like, well, this person's making a joke, where is it coming from? I would feel like that would give you a more neutral framework based on intention and severity of action rather than whether it conflicts with your ideology, which, you know, I can only explain so much in a minute, but that's my 2 cents.
I like it, Margot. Thanks. Debbie, how do you, what do you have to say on that?
I was not familiar with this concept of microaggression, but the question gave me a flashback that was probably 40 years ago. Early in my medical practice, I was wearing a Jewish star and a patient made a comment to me, "Oh, is that a Jewish star or something?" Yeah. "Oh, I knew a Jew once." And I suddenly got this feeling like he's looking at me like I've got horns. And since that day, I didn't wear my star in public except at Jewish events. And I've become more aware of that in recent years, but that strikes me as this microaggression concept.
So, but, you know, I don't want to repeat what you said because I don't want it to sound offensive, but that's also like taking, you know, saying a Jewish star and then calling a name like that, to me, that does feel a little more aggressive. There's probably another way that they could have said, you know, that would have said the same thing without making you feel that way. But that's kind of the difference, right? Like, that's not what I would have said. Yeah. Had I asked that question, that's not what I would have. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Ruth, what would you like to say about this?
So it's the microaggression thing is ripe with what is it now? The word is coming out of my is I'm losing the word. Confirmation bias, right? It's always subtle, and so it's like if I'm late to somewhere, depending on a person's previous idea about me, they might think, oh, something happened, right? That's the generous thought. Or she's inconsiderate because she's late. And it depends on their feeling about me that was unrelated to that particular incident. And so that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say is, you know, people say ignorant things. People are ignorant all the time. People are just don't understand a thing, right? But not understanding a thing isn't aggressing. It's just being ignorant. And in any given situation, you could just, and it depends on the situation, but you could decide, oh, I will help them with this thing that they don't know about that will help them to next time they have that interaction to say a thing that sounds better or feels better for the person. Or you could just let it go and though that this person, you know, didn't know that thing. I think it's really touchy to like, I think it's just ripe with misunderstandings, and it ends up making all that, which the film does a really good job of showing. It ends up making it all the worse for the potentially marginalized person, because now everything seems like a problem, right?
Right. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because I am anxious to hear from some of the younger callers on here. So Eric, can we hear from you?
Yes, of course. Well, yeah, I wanted to take this from a perspective as a college student, as a Gen Z person myself, like some of the people on this call. When I first entered college, I'm a rising senior now. I went in with a sort of naive mind on politics. I wasn't very informed. And I was a slightly liberal leaning. I'm still fairly liberal leaning, but someone who had watched videos with someone like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, some more conservative role models for some conservative individuals my age. And I was surprised going into Brandeis University, which is where I attend, which is about a 30% Jewish population, myself included, that a lot of people, or almost everyone, shuns Ben Shapiro as a figure just based on his politics. And I was thinking, oh, he's a very popular figure in the media now, and he's Jewish. And that to me would be an automatic, like, oh, seems like someone who might be respected at Brandeis. And I wasn't expecting the fact that that wouldn't be the case. And so to me, that's an example of, you know, seeing how intentions are not always put in the right light in college campuses. And something that was very important to me when I was sort of looking at him further and trying to unpack the idea that he's like this figure that people at Brandeis wouldn't particularly like. I found something that he said that even though he openly doesn't like in more public settings and talks, he doesn't talk about as an example, transgender people with their desired pronouns. He said in an interview once that in private settings, he does talk about transgender people with their desired pronouns. And to me, as Margot said, I think that's just a telltale sign of like that respect that is very important to maintain in one-on-one conversations, in those situations where you're trying to understand someone different from you. And that's what I think is a big difference between trying to understand others and microaggressions, and something that would be very helpful to college campuses is like I went to Brandeis expecting diversity of background from the students, and that's something I value very much, but something that I didn't see as much was diversity of thought. And I think that's also something that people should be considering when engaging in a very intellectual environment such as a college campus.
Great, thank you. We'll take one more quick answer on this question, and then I'll go to the next one. Cascade Cook, go ahead.
My husband and I belong to a group that was really trying to teach everybody about microaggressions. And so one of the things they were saying was, don't ask somebody where they're from because they've got an accent. And the thing came up was I was riding I had to have my car towed and riding with a tow truck driver, and he had an accent. So I asked him where he was from. Oh, he was from Afghanistan. We had this wonderful conversation about the Afghani community he was in and so on. And, I think that strikes how much microaggressions are in the eye of the beholder. And I think one of the things Kimmy was really getting at, and I've heard her things, so I can't remember exactly how much she said this in the movie, but it's like when people are taught to, people are being taught to look for microaggressions, that they're being microaggressed. And that just drives them crazy because then they get very suspicious of everybody. And that's not the way, that doesn't help anybody to look at it. So I think if you try to find ways to communicate with people well, try to be polite, but try to also be curious and not make any assumptions in your questions based on what they're from. So I've had a very hard time with this concept of microaggressions because I tend to think they're bad for us. To stress them too much.
Thank you, Cascade. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question, which is, what is the intent of DEI versus how DEI is portrayed in the movie? There's still some hands up. Holly, you want to take that one?
Oh,
sure.
Okay. Or did you want to? I know you were kind of on the last question, but did you? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I feel like it's on that same continuum of the intent is to help people understand that even if their intentions aren't to hurt, there are things that do hurt, and to raise awareness so that we can be more kind and loving towards each other. But then again, some of this, I feel like it's the speed of information, right? Like just the pace of it. If it took 3 or 4 years to sort this out, we'd probably sort it out and edit better. But the pace of all this coming at us, I feel like then it goes very quickly from this good thing that was intended to help us understand one another to something that has wound us all up. And so I appreciate, I had not been exposed to bad DEI, so I appreciate hearing about that. I do think it is good to also remember that, to someone else's comment on here, like even if we're not intending something, it's good to learn about the impact, right? Like on a non-race thing, I have an adopted daughter. People would say goofy things all the time because she's a different color. And, when she's little, saying, oh, is she adopted? Where's she adopted from? I know you care and you're just interested. And I'm in a healthy place to receive that. The older we are, and my daughter's 8 and 9, and now random strangers are coming up asking that, you don't realize what you're doing to our dynamic, right? I don't always want to be reminded that she's not biologically mine. So that's a non-sensitive topic to talk about. But I think the goal was just help us to understand that even if we don't intend, sometimes we are, and how can we listen and care? And I think it's sort of gone beyond that now, but thanks.
That's great, Holly. Thanks. Bruce, what do you want to say about this?
Yeah, so as a high school teacher, I've been through a couple of DEI programs at school, and I found that the intentions are good, but the problem is they're very much connected to the intersectional model, which is kind of creates this binary, which the film talked about, and I appreciated that. And I think I really appreciated that getting back to the first question, that the whole point about that third grade untruth. And I would say a 10th is good, but I think that when you have a model that's rooted in intersectionality, it often it feels religious. It feels like indoctrination. It feels like you're being told you're good or bad. These are the standards, and I've known many teachers who've rebelled against it, and when asked what they thought of it at the end of the day, but also thought twice. How honest am I? Do I have tenure? Do I say what I really thought, that was terrible? So those are some of my thoughts about DEI.
Okay. Yeah, I know that we're coming up on time to the end. Donna, do you think we should just go ahead to the next question? We're definitely
this question is so rich. Why don't you just finish it out, go till 9:30? Okay.
Okay, that sounds good. Ingrid, let's hear what you have to say.
Thank you. So this kind of builds on one of the things Holly mentioned, but I felt like the film really was missing any perspective on what can be the value of DEI when it's done well, right? So they very well and thoroughly address some of the obvious excesses and extremism of some of the DEI trainings and so on. But they don't talk about the fact that, yeah, some of us do want to understand better how to be kind to our neighbors, and things that some of our neighbors are hearing all the time that hurt a lot and are very distancing, we're not aware of. And how can we learn to do better and to know better? And so I would have liked to have seen that perspective included. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ingrid. Kim and Eric, what would you like to add here?
Hi, I'm Kim to the Eric. Yeah, so I've heard a lot of horror stories, just from my perspective, I'm going to call them horror stories, about how DEI has been instantiated in other organizations. And I would say, I personally don't feel like those are well intentioned. However, within my organization, we implemented DEI, and when I first heard about it, I kind of cringed and was kind of really just worried about what we were going to roll out. And then I'm also an executive, so I was also expected to present this content, and I was like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? But I will say that I feel like we've done DEI really well, because it talked about diversity of experience, diversity of thought, diversity of background, the iceberg principle. What you see isn't what is always going on with people, and did a lot of interactive breakout sessions where people could get together and talk in smaller groups about what's your story, what are words that people use to describe you, but what are the words that you would describe yourself. So it was very the people in our organization just came back and were like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, and this was really great, and I felt really included regardless of age, sex, ethnicity, etc. And then just to Holly, I'm adopted. I grew up in Vermont. Not an ethnic person within a 100-mile radius. I've been asked a million times where I'm from, and but I wasn't taught to take offense to that. I was just, it was just part of like, you know, my life and how I grew up. And I guess I just was watching the movie, and then he teaches me a lot, because I kind of, like the other person was telling me that their husband had no idea. I had like no idea this stuff was going on. And it just really, you know, concerns me that we're teaching people to take offense to things that, you know, making them fragile. And that's what I think DEI does in the broader sphere, is it teaches us to take offense to things that just create unnecessary anxiety and anger towards our fellow human beings, when we should be extending, you know, well-intention and love towards each other. So.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kim. Well, and I think, you know, thank you again to the filmmakers, because I think that's what a lot of us are getting, is that, you know, for the younger generation, we don't mean to be teaching you these things, right? Or, you know, consider what you're being taught, that part of the offense that's taken is what we're being taught, how we're being taught to react, and not necessarily, you know, what the truth is. So I know we're right at 6:30 now. So Donna, do you want to start the wrap up?
Sure. So I'm going to do two things. One is to ask you to join Braver Angels. The other is to tell you about our film for August. So the mission of Braver Angels is to unite America. We bring together people who are conservatives and liberals and others to have respectful engagements with each other. We do it through workshops, through debates, through getting involved by bringing politicians together for respectful conversations. We do all sorts of things. We're across the country. And basically, what I like to say is that we're trying not to get you to change your mind about the issue. We want you to change your mind about each other, to realize through these interactions that, hey, that person who I disagree with, you know, I actually are kind of a nice person. My gosh, I think I like them. We actually could be friends. So that's what we do. And so we ask you, if you're not a member yet, to join us. At our webpage, braverangels.org, there's a join us button. It costs as little as $12 a year. We'd like it if you gave us a larger donation, but just for $12 a year, you can join us. Now, secondly, our next movie on August 22nd is a movie called Undivide Us. It's a documentary, and it's new, about the importance of getting people who disagree about issues together to talk. Of course, we at Braver Angels do this on a daily basis, but Undivide Us reinforces why we do what we do. And the movie also highlights an interesting method that encourages people to get inside the head of someone they disagree with. And we're very fortunate that director Christy Kendall will join us for our discussion. So that's August 22nd at 8 p.m. ET. So thank you again so much to Courtney and to Ted Balaker for being here. You have enriched this discussion beyond measure by your presence, by your wisdom, by giving us insights into your movie. So we are most grateful that you were here. And that's it for now. So thank you to all our attendees for being here, and see you next time.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
so
us.
much.
Great
It's
to meet
it's
you
a
all.
pleasure.